Hi everyone, I am here with a true story. This one is by Bill McLeod and it is called Imposters Yet True. A few years before the disintegration of the Iron Curtain and communism across Western Europe, I was unmarried, 20-something, who had just finished working with Louis Palou on a city-wide evangelistic campaign in northeast Scotland. I had started a hitchhiking trip across Europe. Bible smuggling on the side was not exactly in my plan, but as I was hitchhiking, I met a seasoned worker of Christ who was in this undertaking. The man invited me to come with him to take Hungarian Bibles into Hungary's capital city, Budapest. Despite the news that in the past few months other mission groups had been imprisoned for what we were about to do, we carefully loaded boxes of Bibles into his car's secret compartments and started toward the Austrian-Hungarian border. As we approached the city of Sofron, where the crossing would take place, I opened my Bible. The Lord took me to the verses I'd never noticed before, 2 Corinthians 6, 4-8, where the Apostle Paul gave a defense of his sacrifice and ministry, saying they were considered impostors and yet are true. I realized that to hide these Bibles and risk carrying them across this border would require me to be an imposter, and yet in this I was being true to the call of my life to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ. Just before the border, we pulled the car over to pray for our safety and deliverance. Then we drove up to the tall barbed wire fences where uniformed armed guards and turrets looked down on us. After other guards searched the inside of the car, they carefully examined the outside again and then let us pass. Once we were on our way, my friend lifted his fingers to his lips as if to stop me from saying anything. Sure enough, just a little further ahead, we were halted again at another entry point. Between the two entry points, listening devices were used to pick up conversations of unassuming travelers who were unfamiliar with the lengths at which the authorities were taking to determine their visitors' true intentions. When we arrived in Budapest, we found the house church of Hungarian believers who worshipped in secret. They would receive the Bibles. I met a man about my age who had spent his entire 4 years of military duty in jail simply because he was an ashamed follower of Jesus. In the faces of these vibrant believers, I saw something that I lacked. Even with my access to Scripture and freedom to worship and fellowship, I felt naked. They were the ones magnificently clothed. They were impostors and yet true. The time came for us to make the exchange of our precious cargo. We drove around in our car, and they followed us in theirs, looking for a concealed location in the dark. Finally, we chose a spot on the side of the road, about 100 yards away from a brightly lit factory. Everyone scurried with their heads down between the two cars to transfer the Bibles as quickly as possible. Suddenly, someone looked up and saw a guard from the factory approaching. Our transaction came to a chaotic halt. Doors and trunks slammed, and we screeched down the road before the guard could reach us. My heart was pounding, and I quickly learned that missionaries had to become good at improvising. We fervently prayed as we drove around looking for another site to finish the exchange. Finally, we found a secluded, pitch-dark, vacant lot on the side of the road further up into the hills. After looking it over, we made our move. The Bibles were safely and swiftly shuffled without incident. After a quick thank you and farewell to our friends, we drove our separate ways into the night. We were impostors, and yet true. We drove back to the border with a greater sense of relief and peace than we'd had when we'd entered. But as the guard motioned for us to step out of the car so it could be examined, I glanced at the back seat. To my horror, I noticed I had left the Celtic Bible I had brought with me from Scotland in plain sight. The guard immediately picked it up and started looking through it. The mission accomplished feeling evaporated in an instant, and the words in 2 Corinthians 6:8, which had been bringing me such conviction and hope, suddenly felt powerless as I did. Inside, I cried out to the Lord, lifting my head and eyes toward the distant Hungarian hills of Soprano. I immediately remembered the distinctly comforting words of Psalm 121. I lift my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming from this time forth and forevermore. The guard couldn't read the language the Bible was written in, so he turned to me for an explanation. I remember mumbling something about it being just a book indeed. For a moment he hesitated, and then he threw it back on the seat. He hastily motioned for us to leave. No one had to sign for me to be quiet this time. As we sped toward Vienna, we drove in silence for a few miles, taking in the care, protection, and wonder of God. It was a short journey, yet sufficient for the journey of a lifetime. God delivered us. We were impostors, and yet true. We are treated as impostors, and yet are true. 2 Corinthians 6:8. Good night, guys.